The call that changed everything. Houston, we have a problem. These words crackled through space on April 13th, 1970, traveling 205,000 miles across the cold vacuum to reach mission control. In the moments that followed, the lives of three astronauts hung by the thinnest of threads, not rope or wire, but the invisible thread of feedback. The explosion that rocked Apollo 13 didn't just damage a spacecraft, it shattered the illusion that space travel had become routine. In an instant, the mission transformed from a moon landing into a desperate fight for survival. But this story isn't just about three men in a crippled spacecraft. It's about something far more fundamental: the power of feedback loops that keep us alive, whether we're orbiting Earth or sitting in our living room. When that oxygen tank exploded, it triggered a cascade of failures that would test not just technology, but human physiology itself. The spacecraft's systems were interconnected in ways that mirrored our own body's complex feedback mechanisms. Just as your body constantly monitors oxygen levels, adjusts breathing rates, and maintains temperature, the spacecraft relied on similar loops of information and adjustment. The technical complexity of what went wrong that day still astounds engineers. When oxygen tank number 2 exploded, it wasn't just a simple mechanical failure. It was the culmination of a complex chain of events that began long before launch. Just as our bodies can harbor hidden vulnerabilities that only become apparent under stress, the spacecraft's fatal flaw had been lurking unseen, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. The explosion itself was violent enough to blow off an entire panel of the service module, exposing the spacecraft's vital systems to the vacuum of space. In those critical moments, the crew's normal supply of electricity, light, and water was lost, forcing them to adapt rapidly to failing systems, much like how our bodies must instantly adjust when faced with trauma or severe stress. The parallel to human physiology is striking. Just as our bodies have backup systems and compensatory mechanisms, the spacecraft had redundancies built in. But even these backup systems were soon overwhelmed by the cascade of failures. Inside the command module, Jim Lovell noticed it first: the subtle signs that something was wrong. A bang, a shudder, then warning lights flooding the control panel. Our bodies send us similar warnings: a tight chest before a panic attack, elevated heart rate before a crisis, the shortness of breath that signals something isn't right. But just as most of us ignore these signals from our bodies, initial readings from Apollo 13's instruments were confusing, contradictory. The first critical feedback loop to fail was the oxygen system. In our bodies, oxygen regulation is automatic, a symphony of sensors, signals, and responses that we never have to consciously control. Your carotid bodies, tiny clusters of chemoreceptors in your neck arteries, constantly monitor blood oxygen levels. When they detect a drop, they signal your brain to adjust your breathing rate. It's an elegant system that works flawlessly until it doesn't. For the Apollo 13 crew, the oxygen crisis forced them to become conscious participants in their own life support system. They had to monitor every breath, measure every resource. The carbon dioxide scrubbers, their artificial lungs, were running out. Engineers on the ground scrambled to design a makeshift adapter using plastic bags, cardboard, and tape. It was a stark reminder that sometimes survival depends on manually intervening in systems that should run automatically. This is where our story intersects with modern life. While most of us won't face a life or death situation 200,000 miles from Earth, we're all dealing with our own failing feedback loops. Chronic stress disrupts our natural breathing patterns. Anxiety hijacks our heart rate variability. Poor sleep throws off our circadian rhythms. We're all, in our own way, flying damaged spacecraft. The technical reality of that damaged spacecraft was even more dramatic than most people realize. When oxygen tank number 2 exploded, it triggered a cascade of failures that would test the very limits of human ingenuity. 9 minutes after the initial explosion, the second oxygen tank failed as well, leaving the crew with a dwindling supply of the most basic human need. Like a body suffering from severe hypoxia, the spacecraft's systems began shutting down one by one. This mirrors what happens in our bodies during a panic attack or severe stress response. Just as Apollo 13's systems were interconnected, oxygen feeding the fuel cells powering life support, Our biological systems form a complex web of dependencies. When one system fails, others compensate, but this compensation has limits. The crew found themselves in a situation where their normal supply of electricity, light, and water was lost, much like how our bodies enter a conservation mode during extreme stress, shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core survival systems. The Apollo 13 crew had to retreat to the lunar module, their lifeboat. This small craft, designed for moon landings, became their sanctuary. But it wasn't built for 3 men over an extended period. The carbon dioxide levels began to rise. Every breath became precious, measured, monitored. They had to slow their breathing, conserve oxygen, stay calm despite the mounting crisis. This is where the parallel to modern breathing monitoring becomes clear. The astronauts didn't just breathe, they had to understand their breathing. They needed constant feedback about carbon dioxide levels, oxygen consumption, and air quality. Today we have similar technology available to us, breathing belts that measure not just the rate, but the consistency of our breath. These devices provide the same features of feedback that kept 3 astronauts alive in space. But Apollo 13's story goes deeper than just breathing. The entire mission became an exercise in monitoring feedback loops. Temperature control was critical. In space, heat doesn't rise, it just builds up. The spacecraft's temperature regulation systems were compromised, forcing the crew to develop new feedback mechanisms. They had to manually vent the cabin, monitor equipment temperatures, and adjust their position relative to the sun. Our bodies face similar challenges. Your hypothalamus constantly monitors your core temperature, triggering responses like sweating or shivering to maintain the narrow range compatible with life. When this feedback loop fails, as in heat stroke or hypothermia, the results can be fatal. Modern athletes and health enthusiasts use temperature monitoring devices for the same reason, to understand and optimize their body's feedback systems. The environmental challenges faced by the crew went far beyond just temperature control. As their power reserves dwindled, they faced a complex interplay of survival factors that mirror our own body's homeostatic mechanisms. The cabin temperature dropped to nearly freezing, creating conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. Just as our bodies respond to cold by reducing blood flow to extremities and increasing metabolic rate, the crew had to adapt their behavior and resource usage to match their harsh new reality. The mission's most innovative solution came from an unexpected quarter. When carbon dioxide levels began approaching dangerous levels, the team faced what seemed like an impossible problem. The command module's square filters wouldn't fit the lunar module's round filtration system. The solution, dubbed the mailbox, became a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. Using only materials available on board, the crew constructed an adapter that saved their lives. This jerry-rigged solution reminds us that sometimes the most effective answers aren't the most elegant. They're the ones that work when everything else fails. The temperature challenge faced by Apollo 13's crew was particularly severe. The cabin temperature dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, making sleep nearly impossible and turning their breath visible in the frigid air. In space, where convection doesn't work normally, heat distribution becomes a complex dance of radiation and conduction. The crew had to manage this delicate balance while conserving precious power. Each decision about power usage directly affected their thermal comfort and survival chances. The mission's power management crisis mirrors our own energy regulation systems. With their main power source compromised, the astronauts had to shut down nearly every system, operating on minimal power. Our bodies perform similar feats during fasting or extreme exertion, carefully allocating energy resources based on constant feedback about glucose levels, hormone signals, and metabolic needs. Perhaps the most critical feedback loop in the Apollo 13 mission was navigation. Without their main guidance systems, the crew had to manually adjust their trajectory. They used the sun and Earth's terminator line, the boundary between light and dark, as reference points. This manual navigation required intense focus on feedback. Every small adjustment had to be monitored, evaluated, and refined. Our bodies navigate through space in a similar way. Your vestibular system, the intricate network of fluid-filled canals in your inner ear, provides constant feedback about your position and movement. Your proprioceptors tell you where your limbs are in space. Your visual system adds another layer of positional feedback. When any of these systems fail, as in vertigo or motion sickness, we experience the same disorientation the Apollo 13 crew faced in space. The mission's success ultimately came down to the crew's ability to create new feedback loops when the old ones failed. They had to become human sensors monitoring systems that were designed to be automatic. This is precisely what modern biofeedback technology allows us to do. By making invisible processes visible, we can intervene in systems that normally operate below our awareness. Today's breathing monitoring technology brings the same level of awareness to our most fundamental biological process. A breathing belt can show us patterns we'd never notice otherwise. The shallow breathing of stress, the irregular rhythms of chest versus diaphragmatic breathing, the optimal patterns for focus and performance. Just as Apollo 13's crew used their instruments to stay alive, we can use these tools to optimize our own life support systems. The journey home for Apollo 13 took 4 days. 4 days of constant monitoring, adjustment, and response to feedback. Every course correction, every system check, every breath mattered. When they finally splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, they had demonstrated something profound. The power of understanding and responding to feedback can overcome almost any crisis. This is the lesson we need to learn. We're not just passive passengers in our bodies. We're astronauts capable of monitoring, understanding, and adjusting our own systems. The technology exists. The knowledge is available. All that's missing is our conscious participation in the feedback loops that keep us alive. The Apollo 13 mission was called a successful failure because while it never reached the moon, it taught us more about human survival than any successful landing could have. It showed us that feedback isn't just information, it's a lifeline. Whether you're in a spacecraft or sitting at your desk, understanding these feedback loops can mean the difference between thriving and merely surviving. So as you read this book, remember those three astronauts, monitoring every breath, every system, every feedback loop. Remember that you too are flying through space, not in a spacecraft, but on a planet hurtling through the cosmos. Your body is your command module. Your breath is your life support system. And just like those astronauts, you have the power to monitor, understand, and optimize the feedback loops that keep you alive. Houston, we have a solution.